For the purposes of this video, I'm going to say that radical scepticism is the position that it is impossible to have justification for any of our beliefs. So no beliefs whatsoever are justified. We should suspend judgment about everything. This is the most extreme kind of skepticism. If you think that Agrippa's trilemma is a convincing argument, then you would be a radical skeptic in this sense. Now, I don't so much want to talk about radical skepticism, rather I want to talk about my reaction to radical skepticism, because radical skepticism annoys me. I find it irritating. And that's interesting because there are lots of philosophical views that I disagree with, obviously. There's loads of views that I think are wrong, but radical skepticism is one of the few views that I find genuinely irritating, genuinely annoying. And I wanted to explore why that is, right? Why is it? Why is it that radical skepticism annoys me? Now, I should just say, I'm not sure if there are any radical skeptics who watch my videos. I mean, maybe there are. I know there are some people who watch my videos who hold, let's call it fairly radical forms of skepticism. They think that very, very large classes of our beliefs, like beliefs about the external world, are completely unjustified. So certainly there are some people who are nearly radical skeptics. I'm not sure if anybody goes all the way, but I just want to say, it's nothing personal. I don't mean to insult anybody, but it just, I guess it's just a failure on my part to be sufficiently open-minded, and I just want to use this video to explore why exactly it is that, what is it that's different about radical skepticism from all of the other sorts of views that I disagree with. So, I mean, one answer, an easy answer, you might say, is something like this, that the radical skeptic is raising challenges to my beliefs, and obviously I don't like it when people raise challenges to my beliefs. Maybe I don't know how to answer them, and that makes me feel uncomfortable, and so that's why I find it annoying. So I guess that's an easy answer. But then, I'm doing philosophy. I encounter challenges to my beliefs all the time. So I wonder if we can maybe be a bit more charitable to me. And certainly I can be a bit more charitable to me. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to find a more, charitable answer to the question than that. So one thing I think I should say is that, I think that in a sense, radical skepticism is a very strong position, because I don't think there's any convincing response to it, in the sense that I don't think there's any response that should convince a radical skeptic to change their minds. So, in that sense, it's almost sort of unassailable. I don't think anybody's ever actually come up with a kind of compelling argument against it. But even if a position is unassailable, that doesn't necessarily mean it's acceptable. That doesn't necessarily mean you should adopt that position. And a good illustration of this is a position known as trivialism. So trivialism is the position that all propositions are true. Every single one of them. Every proposition is true. So it's true that the Earth is flat. It's true that the Earth is a sphere. It's true that I am an elephant. It's true that I'm not an elephant. Everything. Every proposition is true according to trivialism. Trivialism is obviously an insane position. How could anybody defend it? Actually, somebody has defended it. He's called Paul Cabet, I think. I think he wrote something called On the Plenitude of Truth, I think it was. And he makes an interesting point in his defense of trivialism, which is that it's impossible for anybody to deny trivialism. And the reason is that everything you say simply asserts part of the content of trivialism. So, for instance, if you say trivialism is not true, well, the trivialist already agrees with that, right? Because the trivialist says it's true that trivialism is not true, because trivialism is the view that all propositions are true. So, every argument you make simply asserts part of the content of trivialism. So, in that sense, trivialism is unassailable. You simply can't present an argument that could possibly convince a trivialist to change their mind, because the trivialist will already agree with every single premise and every single conclusion you state. But obviously, trivialism is not acceptable. So I suppose the question is radical skepticism unacceptable or maybe defective in some sense, in maybe a similar kind of way that trivialism is? Just because radical skepticism is unassailable doesn't necessarily mean that it's acceptable. So, okay then, what exactly is it then that's wrong with skepticism? And I'm not so much, as I say, I don't know if I'm so much giving an argument against the skeptic as I am just exploring why it is that I find skepticism, why it irritates me. I think that part of the problem is that it's not really psychologically possible to be a skeptic. So anybody who claims to be a skeptic is lying, it seems to me. If you were genuinely a radical skeptic, if you genuinely didn't have any beliefs at all, this would just paralyze you. It would make you completely unable to act. You wouldn't be able to do anything. But obviously, everybody who calls themselves a skeptic, they do, in fact, do things. They do perform actions, and they might sort of feel hungry, and so they go to the fridge and get some food out, right? I mean, they are revealing in their actions that they actually do hold various beliefs about the world. So I guess to put it in a slogan, actions sometimes speak louder than words. Beliefs are not just abstract propositions sitting in our heads, they are tied to behaviour. If you genuinely didn't believe anything, then you would just have no basis at all for performing any actions whatsoever. Now, it is true that sometimes we act in conditions of ignorance. So let's say somebody puts a gun to my head and tells me that they're going to flip a coin, and I have to decide whether it lands heads or tails, and they'll shoot me if I get it wrong. In that case, I don't know whether it's going to land heads or tails. I'm ignorant. I have suspended judgment, but I just have to guess. So in that context, I'm acting, you might say, but not on the basis of a belief. So couldn't a skeptic say that their actions are also just on the basis of guesses or something like that? But actually, it's not the same at all, because in the coin flipping example, although I'm ignorant about how the coin is going to land, that ignorance is still against a background of all sorts of other beliefs. So, for instance, I believe that somebody's pointing a gun at my head and that they're going to kill me if I don't say anything, and that's why I'm calling it one way or another rather than just walking away and ignoring them. I also I believe that when they flip the coin and I say heads, gravity is still going to hold me to the floor. If you're genuinely a skeptic, you would have no idea whether or not what the effects of you calling heads would be. Yes, there are contexts where we kind of have to act under conditions of ignorance, but those still take place against a background of belief. So it's not at all similar to the radical skeptic. So anyway, I think that one issue with radical skepticism is, as I say, it's just psychologically impossible to hold. Nobody actually is a radical skeptic, and so the people who claim to be radical skeptics are lying, which is rude, and that, I think, is maybe one reason why it's irritating, because it's irritating when people are rude to you. Okay, a second possible reason why I find skepticism irritating is this. Whenever we engage in any inquiry, it seems like there are sort of two types of errors, right? There's the error of believing what is false and the error of failing to believe what is true. So what we want to do is to minimize false beliefs and maximize true beliefs. Now, obviously, these two goals are in tension with each other, because whatever method it is that you apply to maximize your true beliefs, to gain true beliefs, that's inevitably going to let in some false beliefs. So, the more true beliefs you let in, you're likely to let in more false beliefs as well. And obviously, people, so that there's a tension there, and people are going to, weigh these two goals differently. Some people will be more willing to take epistemic risks than others. Some people will be very concerned about minimizing false beliefs, and so they'll be very sort of conservative and tend to be fairly skeptical. Other people might be more willing to just take risks in order to gain true beliefs. So, but you know, the point is that basically all parties to any debate are going to recognise that there are situations where we can acquire the truth, and no matter how different our philosophical views may be, we're both going to share these two aims. We're both going to want to maximise true beliefs and minimise false ones. You know, no matter how big our disagreement, and even if we weigh these two aims slightly differently. But that's not the case with the skeptic, or so it seems, right? It seems like the skeptic is entirely concerned with minimising false beliefs, and they put no effort whatsoever into maximising true beliefs. It's like the skeptic is playing a different game to the rest of us. In fact, the skeptic doesn't seem to be playing any game at all, because the skeptic just isn't willing to take any risk whatsoever in order to gain a true belief. And so that is, you know, it's almost like she removes herself from the conversation. I kind of feel like skepticism is the sort of epistemic equivalent of negative utilitarianism. So the negative utilitarian says that the morally right action is whatever minimizes suffering, and that's it. Right? We should just try to minimize suffering. But the obvious problem with that is that the best way to minimize suffering would be to blow up the world. If we had the technology to do so, we should just press a button and destroy everything. And it kind of feels like skepticism is similarly destroying everything in the sort of epistemic context, because the only concern is to minimize false belief, but without any attempt to take any sort of risk in order to get a true belief. But that's the whole point of the debate. That seems to be the whole point of our conversation. Is we want to gain true beliefs, and we're going to take risks to try to get there. Now there is, I think, an issue with this. I guess point that I've just raised, which is that it looks like there are all sorts of kind of conversational contexts. There are all sorts of domains of inquiry where it's just not appropriate to evaluate things in terms of truth and falsity. So it would make no sense to say that the aim is to, minimize false beliefs and maximize true beliefs. So I'm a moral anti-realist, and I think that evaluating moral claims in terms of their truth and falsity is inappropriate. So, I don't think that we should be aiming to have, true moral beliefs. That's just the wrong way to conceive of morality in my view. So I guess the skeptic could respond to what I've just said by saying, well, actually even you recognise that there are situations where the aim is not to acquire true belief. But I think what I would say to that is that, well, if the skeptic is certainly concerned about avoiding false beliefs, and if you're concerned with avoiding false beliefs, then you are operating, or at least you take yourself to be operating in a domain of inquiry where truth and falsehood are appropriate standards of evaluation. It's appropriate to apply those to the conclusions that are being drawn. So yeah, I suppose it's that if you're in a domain of inquiry where truth and falsehood are the appropriate standards of evaluation, then we're going to be aiming for true belief and for avoiding false belief. But the skeptic just has a completely different. Well, she seems to be playing a completely different game. So maybe that's a problem. Maybe that's what I find irritating. So a third thing that perhaps makes skepticism irritating is the fact that there is absolutely no common ground with a skeptic. If somebody is genuinely a skeptic, if there were, which, I mean, as I've said earlier, there aren't, but if just imagine that there were somebody who were a skeptic, you would have no common ground with them. And any time it seemed like you were gaining any sort of common ground, you'd be wrong, because the skeptic holds no beliefs whatsoever. And one of the things we do when we engage in arguments is, we state some premises, and then we state a conclusion, and we hope that the premises are true and that they validly entail the conclusion. But right, without even engaging in any conversation, you know that if somebody's a skeptic, they will reject any premise you state, right? They will say that any premise you give, they will reject the justification for it. There is absolutely nothing you can say to a skeptic that they're going to agree with. So there's no way of getting any kind of common ground with them. I mean, in many ways, it's sort of the inverse of the situation with the trivialist, because with the trivialist, as we saw, there's no possibility of disagreement. Every single thing you say is simply asserting part of the content of trivialism. So at no point are you kind of in a position of disagreement, right? And so there's no way of getting any kind of debate started. But similarly then with the skeptic, it's the exact opposite. There's no possibility of agreement. I know that they're just going to deny the justification for every assertion I make. So, you know, I mean, certainly there's no way you could ever possibly persuade a skeptic by any argument, because, you know, they just reject every premise. I mean, there's also nothing you can do you can't sort of learn anything about how a skeptic's beliefs hang together, because they don't have any beliefs. So, you know, you can't persuade them, you can't learn anything about their beliefs. I mean, what's the point of having a conversation with them at all? Okay, summing up. Why is it that I don't just disagree with skepticism, but I find it annoying? Well, I've thought of 3 possible reasons. One reason is that it's psychologically impossible to be a skeptic. Anybody who claims to be a skeptic is lying, which is rude. Secondly, the skeptic is just, in a sense, removing herself from the conversation insofar as she just doesn't recognise that maximising true beliefs is a legitimate aim. And finally, there is no possibility with having any kind of common ground with a skeptic. You know, there's just nowhere of even getting a conversation started in that sense. Okay, so yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about. And I mean, look, I haven't actually given any real argument against skepticism here. That wasn't the point. So it's just an attempt to, you know, explore, just something about my psychology. Why is it that skepticism is irritating? As I say, maybe it's just, you know, that that I don't know how to answer the skeptic, and so I find that to be an uncomfortable challenge to my beliefs. Maybe it is just that, but. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks.